Welcome everyone to the number 6 Polygen Symposium of the Rising Scholars. My name is Carlos. I am a PhD student from Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, and I will be moderating the talk for today. The goal of the symposium is to celebrate and showcase the hard work of all our Polygen scholars, so you guys, all of whom you guys have worked tirelessly on your projects and over the past months. We have 3 student presentations today. They'll be talking about very different topics. A fellow Polygen's mentor will be scoring each student's presentation, so just keep that in mind, and that will help us determine the prize determine the prize winners for the event. If you have any questions, please just type them in the chat, and I'll just pass it along to our speakers. And towards the end, we'll have 2 minutes to answer all the questions. So today's speakers are Param will be first, Vasanth will be our second speaker, and Sai will be a third. So take it away, Param. It's all yours.
Hello everyone, my name is Param Gogia and I am a high school junior at the Mahindra United College in India. And this is my Polygen Symposium presentation. My project was a research project in astrophysics, which resulted in a research paper, the title of which is a theoretical study of the magnetic field generated due to the rotation of coronae in active galactic nuclei. And I completed this paper with the help of my mentor, Mr. San, who's a graduate student at UCSD. Absolute superstar. So the research question might seem wordy and a bit too technical. So firstly, let's dive into what an active galactic nucleus truly means. So an active galactic nuclei, abbreviated as AGN, quite intuitively, they are highly energetic centers of galaxies powered by accretion or consumption of galactic matter onto a supermassive black hole. What this essentially means is that you have a supermassive black hole at the center of a galaxy, and when this supermassive black hole eats the matter in the galaxy, it generates and produces this new astrophysical object known as an AGN. So if you look at the structure of an AGN, you have the supermassive black hole at the center of the galaxy, around which is an accretion disk. Now, what an accretion disk is that it's a thin disk around the supermassive black hole formed of the galactic matter. And the reason behind the formation of this disk is that because the black hole has such a large gravitational potential, and because it has spin, and so does the galactic matter around it, the matter inside the galaxy can't be directly consumed because it has angular momentum, due to which it kind of orbits the supermassive black hole and forms a thin disk around the supermassive black hole. Now, the structure surrounding this is a dusty torus, which is essentially just a toroidal or a donut-shaped cloud of gas and dust, the gas primarily being ionized hydrogen. The next structure is the relativistic jets, which are at angle perpendicular to the accretion disk. And these are essentially just particles from the accretion disk accelerated at a very high velocity at a very substantial fraction of the speed of light in both directions perpendicular to the accretion disk. And the various types of AGN that we can observe are just functions of the observing angle that we have from Earth relative to a reference point which runs parallel to the accretion disk. So the greater is the observing angle, the different types of AGN that you can observe. And this has a correlation with what parts of the AGN you can see. So if we look from the reference point, you can't really see a lot. But in the case of having a blazer where you can directly look into the relativistic jets and also look at the supermassive black hole, the accretion disk, and the dusty torus, you have a lot of emissions within the spectrum of the AGN. Now we have some visuals of an active galactic nucleus. This one is a very specific one and a significant one, in fact. This is actually the first image of a black hole, which was taken in 2019 by NASA. And it's a common misconception because this is actually the first image of an active galactic nucleus. Uh, in the middle of it, you can see a supermassive black hole surrounding which is the accretion disk, which emits in the optical wavelength and very strongly in the X-ray wavelengths and the radio wavelengths. And this is at the center of a galaxy M87 or Messier 87, which is roughly 5,000 light years away from the Milky Way. This again is another photo taken in the optical wavelengths of the same structure, the AGN within M87. And you see the light source being the supermassive black hole, the accretion disk. And this is actually the relativistic jet. And it has this distinctive bluish tinge, which is formed due to synchrotron radiation. And synchrotron radiation is something that we'll come to later and which plays a very crucial role to my research. Now, why are AGN important in the first place? Well, there are millions of radio galaxies in the universe, with about 800 classified as massive. And a radio galaxy is any galaxy with an AGN. Secondly, supermassive black holes are considered to be at the center of all galaxies, and since AGN are powered by supermassive black holes, study of AGN provides insight into black hole research as well. And the reason why we know that there is a supermassive black hole at the center of all galaxies is due to the M sigma relation, the graph of which is shown here. And in a nutshell, the M sigma relation states that the stars which are closer to the center of a galaxy will orbit the center faster than those which are away from the center. And we can infer that there is something really massive with a large gravitational potential at the center of the gravity. And once we figure out the mass of this expected object, it correlates very well with what you would expect to find in a supermassive black hole. And you can see some very popular galaxies here, with the Milky Way being an exception, and the M sigma correlation fits very well. And it's a widely accepted theorem that there is a supermassive black hole at the center of all galaxies. Thirdly, AGN are believed to widely affect formation and evolution of galaxies. And since stellar systems are affected by the evolution of galaxies, and evolution of stellar systems affects planets and ultimately us, because we're all made from the same matter, this plays a very significant role in AGN research. Now, what exactly is the concentration of my research? This is actually an image of a composite image of Cygnus A, which is another close by galaxy. And you can see the supermassive black hole at the center of it. And these red streaks are, in fact, the relativistic jets. And my research concentrates on why these relativistic jets are formed and what's the mechanism behind its evolution and formation. So the first step in my research process was observational evidence. When you take the X-ray continuum spectrum of an active galactic nucleus, what you observe is that there is a soft excess or a peak in the intensity at very low energy. And this is explained by a hypothesis called the two coronae model. What it essentially says is that you have the black hole, and this is enveloped by two layers of ionized hydrogen, which are called coronae. And the interaction between these two coronae is what causes this X-ray emission at low energy. Now, my inference is that if you have two layers of coronae around an AGN, which has a supermassive black hole at the center of it, with a huge gravitational potential and a huge spin, it's illogical that the two coronae would not rotate and have a rotation of its own. Therefore, because the coronae are made of ionized hydrogen, when charge rotates, it causes an electric current, and an electric current always produces a magnetic field. And this magnetic field would be central to why these relativistic jets emerge. So you have the supermassive black hole, the accretion disk, and two hemispherical shells, which are the coronae, above and below the accretion disk, which are rotating in opposite directions. So they're counter-rotating. Now, at this point, actually, I would like to show my research paper and some mathematics behind it. So firstly, I theoretically obtained an expression for the magnetic field strength generated by such a system. And the way I did that is that I took an elementary ring similar to the accretion disk, and I integrated that from 0 to 90 degrees, obtaining this expression for the magnetic field strength, which is a product of the permittivity constant times the surface area charge distribution times the angular velocity times the radius of the coronae, all divided by 3. And this is a theoretical projection having an assumption that these two coronae are hemispherical shells, very similar to, let's say, a circular egg. Now, further, I approximated, taking Cygnus A as an example, the picture of which you saw earlier, and correlated the magnetic field predicted by synchrotron radiation and the magnetic field of my model, and if that fits together. So firstly, let's define what synchrotron radiation is. Synchrotron radiation is the electromagnetic radiation emitted when a charged particle is accelerated by a force. In this case, the force is magnetic force. This requires that the particle is moving at a fairly high velocity to be considered as a relativistic case, which means a substantial fraction of the speed of light. And skipping over some very thorough mathematics, I found the value of this constant, which is the charge over the radius multiplied by the time period of revolution of the coronae, to be this value, which is 357.995 Franklin per centimeter per second. And the reason why I have this constant and not a proper value is because there is no observational evidence for these three variables, which are the charge, the radius, and the time period. So some further research could entail having observational values for the three variables, evidence for the two coronae model, although it is fairly well established and fits very well with observational data. It's still very young, only released in 2019. And further, analyzing a case with a non-uniform distribution of charge. So that is it. And now I'd love to take any questions.
Wow, great job, Param. Questions, you can type them in the chat. Give one more minute. I think for me, I'm gonna just ask you, like, why did you got interested in this in the first place? I think that's a very interesting topic. I think it's very big scale. I'm just interested to know why you got into it.
So I was into the pure sciences and astrophysics since I was a kid. I consider myself to be a fairly curious person. I continue to ask questions around me all the time and question everything that surrounds me. And I've been into astrophysics for a very long time, since my childhood, since I was about 12, because I saw that most of my questions were directed towards the nature of reality and how our universe functions and behind physics and math. So just developing that further, active galactic nuclei is one portion that I haven't really deep dived into. So I thought that this research project would be perfect for it.
That's awesome. Oh, there you go. Kevin asks, could you go into a little bit more detail about how to come up with the numbers of your equation?
I assume this is the final value, right? Oh, okay, perfect. So let me just scroll up a bit. Essentially, I used the energy density that you would have from the electrons which are being accelerated by the supermassive black hole in the relativistic jet. And we can observe the synchrotron radiation that is emitted by a black hole. So you can find the magnetic field from and correlate that to the synchrotron radiation that we observe, and which has an expression here. And this is, in fact, a minimum magnetic field strength. So, of course, you can have a higher field strength, which would result in a corona with more charge, or, in fact, a faster rotating corona or a smaller corona. Now, I found the observational value of this minimum magnetic field using these variables, and then set that equal to the magnetic field expression that I found in the two coronary model theoretically. And that kind of developed forward into this value. I hope that answers your question. Oh, perfect.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Param.
So much. This was an amazing experience.
Good. Next up, we have Vasanth. Vasanth, go ahead.
Yeah. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. So hi everyone. My name is Vasanth Gogineni, and my project is low thrust satellite trajectory optimization. So I'll dive into the abstract of my project. So in space, we know that fuel is very scarce, and for some missions, time is not a problem. So for example, when some space agencies are conducting a mission from the Earth to the Sun, they might not require going very fast, but they might actually require going very slowly in order to collect some data. And it's very common that fuel is very scarce because and these two factors, a lack of fuel and an abundance of time, they complement low thrust satellites. So low thrust satellites have both these features since they can't move very fast in space, but it's also important to optimize their fuel use. So when they're traveling across space, they might use more fuel than needed, and it might be required for future maneuvers, and it's better not to waste it. And that's why you have to optimize the trajectory. And most of the time, optimizing the trajectory or path of the satellite leads to optimizing the fuel use. And optimizing the trajectory will lead to optimizing the thrust profile. The thrust profile is basically the pattern of thrust that the satellite uses. So it could actually do a forward thrust, and later it could do a backward thrust in order to optimize its trajectory. So essentially, this is my project. It's an example of my project. If a satellite starts from here, this point at the top, and the sun is at the center, we're trying to do an orbit lowering maneuver, or we're trying to make the orbit of the satellite smaller in a way that uses the least fuel possible. So if it starts from here, it could, as you see, it's taking multiple revolutions around the sun because low thrust satellites don't have enough thrust to do it all at once. And that's why it's optimizing the thrust profile. Here you can see it's actually moving away from the sun, and then it moves towards the sun. That's because moving away from the sun, since higher orbits or bigger orbits reduce the speed of the satellite, and it moves itself to a higher orbit, and then it gives another backward thrust that slows it down even more, and that allows the sun to pull it inwards. And essentially, it's using a gravity assist from the sun, and it's optimizing its fuel use by allowing the sun to do its work. So basically, my project is about orbit lowering maneuvers with by optimizing fuel use in low thrust satellites. So to do that, I actually had to start off with the orbital mechanics and equations, but I used those equations in a VPython simulation. That's essentially a simulation of how those equations work, and I did it to verify how well those equations would work for my optimization problem. So this is a video of the VPython simulation. So VPython is basically a Python package that allows you to create different simulations, and I use those equations here to verify it. So this here is the Earth, and I tried putting an arbitrary or example satellite around it just to see if it works. And it allowed me to put multiple planets in using the same equations. And over time, those equations were still persistent, they were still accurate. And you could even see that inclination, you can see the inclination of the orbits, and that again shows the accuracy of those equations. So then after this VPython simulation, after verifying my equations, I moved on to the mathematical optimization problem. So this mathematical optimization problem, it's basically the conversion of that graph I showed. It's basically a conversion of that whole problem into a mathematical form or into equations so that I could put it in code. So basically, in the mathematical optimization problem, I had to consider various variables. The main one is basically the fuel constraints, because that's basically the point of this optimization problem. But it also had to consider planet positions, because that could affect the, for example, if a satellite is starting from Earth, that could affect how much fuel it uses. And another thing is areas of interest, or how close the satellite would need to be to another planet or something like that. So in the mathematical optimization problem, I had to consider a few variables, and the main one was the force on the satellite. So the force on the satellite is shown by this equation here, and it's F equal to G m1 m2 by r square. And this is a general equation that allows you to calculate the force on the satellite by the bigger body, which is the sun. And that force is always directed towards the sun, because the force directed inwards, it allows a satellite to have circular motion, or it allows the satellite to sustain its orbit around the sun. And the next value is a momentum. Momentum is given by this equation here, but I also had to consider the position of the satellite, which is r, and the momentum of the satellite, and these values keep changing. So the position of the satellite keeps changing, the momentum or speed basically keeps changing, and that's what these differential equations are here. They basically show how fast or slow the position changes. And to consider my optimization problem, I added in these two parts called Tx and Ty. They're basically just the thrust variables, and they're the manipulated variables of the independent variables that the algorithm or the solver is allowed to change. So it can keep changing those variables. It can keep changing the value of that maximum thrust. It can keep changing it to provide a thrust profile or a pattern of thrust that uses the least fuel possible. And as you can see, these are the differential equation: position, acceleration, and velocity, because those are the main things that keep changing as the satellite moves around the sun. And our objective is to minimize thrust profile. So as you can see here, this minimum of T of t is basically a combination of Tx and Ty. As they keep being changed, the objective function or the solver tries to minimize the total usage of the fuel, and we're assuming that the fuel is the same as the thrust. And here, the way we set up the problem is that the radius, or the final distance from the sun to the satellite, is less than a desired value. So it's basically going to a desired orbit radius that we would want, or the size of the orbit that we would want. And here, to ensure that it's low thrust, we're putting a maximum cap on the thrust, which is less than T max. And these are all the supporting equations, which are much more detailed. And after these equations, I could put them into Gecko, which is basically a Python package that uses optimization solvers in order to, it uses this IPOpt solver in order to give certain results that optimize an objective function. And as I mentioned, our objective function was the minimum thrust. So in Gecko, this is basically a part of my Gecko code. As you can see, it's the same equations, but there are many intermediate equations. And finally, we have the same objective function, which is basically the final of the thrust value. So what the algorithm does is it iterates, or it moves through different thrust profiles. It keeps experimenting with many thrust patterns in order to see which thrust pattern provides the least fuel use in order to get the satellite to a lower orbit. So from all of these equations and from the algorithm, I always got three graphs, and the first graph is the satellite trajectory or path. And for every experiment, it had a different path. That's because I kept changing the maximum thrust values and the satellite positions. And as you can see, optimizing the thrust pattern is not always just thrusting backwards to move towards the sun, but it also involves more complex maneuvers by first thrusting forward and then waiting for some time, which is at 0, and thrusting backward again. And that essentially moved it away from the sun, and then it brought it towards the sun, and it allowed a gravity assist to happen. So it allowed the sun to pull the satellite inward automatically. So in experiment 1, I actually changed the planet of origin, and that's basically changing how far the satellite is from the sun, since Mars is further than the Earth. And by changing how far the initial position is, I got these values for the total thrust usage. So as you can see, when it's further away, it uses more thrust. And Saturn here, I couldn't. It may look like an anomalous data point, but the thing is, uh, the optimization solver, it had many infeasibilities, so I had to change how accurate it could be, and that's why we ended up with a lower value. But overall, there's a general trend that as the satellite is further away, it uses more thrust to move towards the sun. Then the another important experiment I did is experimenting with changing the maximum thrust the satellite has. So I changed from 1, 2, 3, 4 in terms of thrust, and as the thrust was increasing, the efficiency or the fuel use efficiency kept increasing, but the fuel use kept decreasing. And again, this 4 in 10 to the power minus 5, it may have been an infeasibility, but overall we see that the amount of fuel use reduces up to a certain point or up to a certain maximum thrust value, where it sort of plateaus, as in like the efficiency doesn't change anymore, or it may even decline. So after all that optimization experiments, I can look at future applications of the same algorithm. And all of this, I use the sun as a central body, but I could use the Earth as the central body and achieve the same effect with geostationary satellites or other satellites. And I could also do interplanetary satellite trajectory optimization. I could do the same algorithm using 2 different satellites that are orbiting the same star, meaning that it optimized the fuel use to transfer the satellite between the planets. Or I could also test the same algorithm in a case study or a real life situation where I take a previous mission and see how good its fuel use was, or how efficient it was, or how it could be optimized. But I could also use it in orbit raising maneuvers. As I've shown, I've used it in orbit lowering maneuvers. Orbit raising maneuvers would be an example here of Voyager 1, as it increases its orbit from the blue orbit to the cyan orbit. And I could optimize the fuel use in that case also. And that would allow me to achieve the same effect with the gravity assist, since the satellite here uses the gravity assist from the cyan planet. And overall, these applications, I plan to implement them in the future. And I would like to thank my mentor Maitreya for helping me throughout this project. And thank you all for listening. Does anyone have any questions?
Great job, Vasanth. All right, questions in the chat. So Kevin asked, he says, "Hi Vasanth, I actually used to work in mission operations, maneuvering communication satellites in exactly the kinds of orbits racing you described. Not sure how accessible this kind of information is, but did you get a chance to look at how engineers calculate orbit racing maneuvers historically?"
Yeah, so I've seen different methods of doing it, or doing low thrust trajectory optimization. So one of them was discrete time trajectory optimization, and that's what I've done here. So I think I'll just go back to that slide. Yeah, so here I use time discretization. So it's basically a time horizon here, which I set to 8 years, but I kept changing it between experiments because of infeasibilities. And basically, at the end, I integrated all the fuel use at the time points, and I used the final time points fuel use to see how much fuel it used at the end. And by doing that and using all the integrations of all the fuel uses, I saw the solver calculated which thrust profile was the best. But other than this method, I think there are other methods which are more direct, as in they don't make different time points and optimize it. And yeah, I don't remember any others. Basically, this is dynamic and discrete time trajectory optimization, but some of them didn't use these simultaneous equations, and they did more static methods.
All right. Okay, we're gonna move on. Thank you, Vasanth. I appreciate the presentation. Very cool.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
So last up, we have Sai. Go ahead. I'm personally biased on this one because I am a cancer biology student at Bandy.
Yes. So my motto is that curiosity is the wick in the candle of learning. And good morning, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to present my research titled Genetic Engineering as an Effective Cancer Therapy, a focus on CRISPR. Here's a brief overview of my presentation. So genetic engineering is the direct manipulation of an organism's genetic material in order to produce a desired phenotypic characteristic. And it has been promising for its precision, its accuracy, and its potential to correct genes that cause lethal diseases. So my research aims to focus on the gene editing tool CRISPR and endonuclease Cas9 as cancer therapy with special attention to three highly metastatic cancers, that is the triple negative breast cancer, glioblastoma, and acute myeloid leukemia. My goal is to find and compile curative CRISPR targets for the above cancer types in order to promote better survival and remission. And these targets may be engineered to correct faulty tumorigenic genes. So first of all, cancer is a group of diseases characterized by unregulated cell growth and the invasion of spread of cells from the site of the primary site to other regions in the body, which is what makes cancer the most lethal disease. And based on the location of the primary, it is classified into three major subtypes, that is the carcinoma, adenocarcinoma, and sarcoma. And as you can see in the given figure, you can find a clear demarcation between how a carcinoma is and how your regular tissue is. Not all unregulatedly growing cells are classified as cancer. Hence, the demarcation of a tumor cell from a normal cell is defined by the 6 hallmarks of cancer. So you might ask me, how does a genetic mutation lead to cancer? So this is when a process termed as multi-step carcinogenesis comes into play, which has 4 major steps, beginning with the tumor initiation, where an irreparable DNA damage is caused, and next, tumor promotion. Third is the malignant conversion, and fourth is the metastasis. So cancer is one of the most lethal diseases, and statistics suggest that its prevalence has increased linearly with time. And as you can see the numbers, the cancer incidence is expected to almost double within a few decades. And the probability that a person could be diagnosed with cancer in their lifetime is around 40%. So understanding these statistics is vital as it drives scientists to discover and improve potential therapies which are suited to the tumor microenvironment of the patient, which means you're using personalized therapies for each patient rather than the one-size-fits-all therapies. And this is the basis of gene editing and genetic engineering. And this is what brings us to CRISPR-Cas9. Hailed as the booming technology, CRISPR-Cas9 is a technique that allows for highly specific and rapid modification of DNA in a genome. It was initially an adaptive immune system of prokaryotes and other bacteria, but now it is a versatile gene editing technique and can perform faster gene editing and multiple allele correction. It also confers to lessening the duration of gene editing from months or years to days. And even species which are resistant to gene editing may benefit from CRISPR. And it is commonly called the gene scissors. The biggest curious factor everyone would have is how does CRISPR-Cas9 work? It acts in a sequence-specific manner by recognizing and cleaving foreign DNA. So first, the foreign sequence is recognized by the CRISPR RNA complex, which induces a double-stranded break in your DNA because your DNA is a double helical structure. Then the programmed DNA, which is the putative target scientists are trying to focus on, is inserted, which is engineered in the lab. And at this point, your DNA will recognize degradation and it switches on its repair machinery in order to repair the cut. And post-repair, the faulty mutation will have been corrected. Yes, CRISPR is great, but how can we use it for cancer? So CRISPR-Cas9 is promising as gene therapy by targeting a group of genes and proteins that support cancer cell function like metastasis, angiogenesis, drug resistance, immune loss, and even proliferation. All these names you can see in italics here is actually genes of your body. And the ultimate goal of employing CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing is to produce an anti-lung cancer effect. So you could knock out, say, EGFR, and it could produce an anti-lung cancer effect. And all these therapies are coupled together. So what is a putative target, first of all? So it is defined as a gene or protein that the CRISPR RNA could target so as to switch on CRISPR machinery in order to repair the genetic lesion. And they are found using various molecular profiling techniques existing today, like the CRISPR polymerase chain reaction, FISH, immunohistochemistry, nanostring technologies, and next generation sequencing technology. So the first cancer of our focus is triple-negative breast cancer, which is an aggressive variant of breast cancer, constituting 10 to 20% of all cases. And it is characterized by the lack of expression of the estrogen and the progesterone receptors, as well as HER2. And it has a very high rate of distant metastasis and poorer disease-specific survival than other subtypes. So keeping all these things in mind, it's pressing at the moment that we find better prognostic factors in order to prevent patient death and even allow quicker remission, because it is associated with shorter median time of relapse and death. So here are the CRISPR targets for triple-negative breast cancer, and each of them have various functions in the cancer cell. And the most promising factors here are IGFR, ORC-A-B, and PI3K, as well as mTOR. Our next target cancer of focus was glioblastoma, which is an aggressive variant of brain cancer again, which arises from the astrocyte cells of the brain. And it is found in the cerebral white matter, and it can grow extremely quickly before producing symptoms, which contributes to its uncontrolled metastasis. And this obviously calls for better therapies and prevent patient death. So one thing everyone must keep in mind is that neuronal cells are harder to culture as compared to other cells. So it is difficult to find targets for neuronal tumors. But here are some promising targets for glioblastoma. And PD-1, PDL1 is an programmed cell death protein, which is a promising target, as well as STIRT, which is uh, a protein that inhibits the telomerase activity, thereby inhibiting excess generations of cancerous cells forming in the body. And next, we are going to talk about acute myeloid leukemia, which is the most common leukemia in the adult population. And it is characterized by the clonal expansion of blast cells in the peripheral blood and bone marrow, resulting in faulty hematopoiesis and ultimately bone marrow failure. And despite advancement in therapeutic regimes, the prognosis remains very poor in elderly populations because AML is extremely highly heterogeneous compared to other types of cancers. It has a more higher number of factors contributing to its formation, as shown in the slide. So keeping these factors in mind, there's a need for finding targeted therapies for acute myeloid leukemia. And out of all the targets you can see here, the WNT beta-catenin amplification is extremely promising because it promotes immune surveillance, because most of the time acute myeloid leukemia is not easily detectable until it reaches a certain stage. So this target seems promising, as well as IDH inhibitors and FLT3 inhibitors. And as you can see, PD-1 and PDL1, it's a common target for multiple cancers, and it is promising if you use PD-1, PDL1 along with the other targets mentioned here. So cancer therapies need urgent modifications to promote larger survival rates. And cancer, as you saw the statistics, there is an urgent need for targeted therapies because rates are projected to rise. And CRISPR is the most efficient gene editing technique based on my research. And I studied targets for 3 aggressive cancers and understood their mechanisms. And compiling of these targets could be used for future studies and also engineered to use as gene therapy once there is an FDA approval and approval from government agencies. Here's a brief summary of my presentation. And I started with the introduction to cancer. You understood the mechanisms and how CRISPR technology applies to cancer. And we understood curative targets for 3 cancers of focus. And finally, the significance of my study and the importance of CRISPR for cancer. Thank you so much. And also a huge thank you to my mentor, Dr. Jose Delgado. And I hope you enjoy the presentation, and I'm open for questions.
Great job, Sai. Questions in the chat. Okay, so Kevin says, hi, Sai, do you know if there has been any research done regarding CRISPR application to other diseases?
Yes, there has been a lot of, actually, I want to tell, CRISPR is not just for cancer. You could use it for any lethal conditions. The point of CRISPR is that the point is that most of the diseases that arise in a human population are caused due to underlying genetic reasons. So you're directly going to the genetic level when you're bringing CRISPR into dealing with other diseases. And especially heart disease and diabetes are becoming extremely, extremely common and prevalent in this era. So especially you could use CRISPR for the insulin resistant diabetes, as well as the diabetes where you don't have the pancreas producing insulin, that is type 1. So I hope this answers your question, that there's a lot of research about other diseases as well.
Sai, one question: how do you deliver CRISPR-Cas9s to humans?
So there are multiple techniques which scientists are trying to research, and one way you could do is by using tiny nanolipids, which have low molecular weight, which can easily penetrate through the cell. So nanolipid technology seems to be promising, and also you can use other vectors, which are basically other types of viruses. Viruses that do not cause much harm to the body. Actually, the whole point of engineering those virus sort of capsules in the lab is to deliver CRISPR into the body. So essentially, it's a capsule.
Awesome. Okay. All right. Thank you, Sai. Thank you, Param, Vasanth. Great job. I'm proud of you guys. It's a lot of work. It's very challenging, very daring, and you guys did a great job at it. So thank you for presenting here. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the conference. And hopefully one of you guys will win the prize. All right, stick around for the conference.
Thank you so much, and thank you to my co-panelists.
All right, see you guys.
Thank you, everyone.